The American Clearinghouse on Educational Facilities is pleased to host today's webinar. For those of you attending your first ACEF webinar, ACEF is the Educational Facilities Clearinghouse funded by the U.S. Department of Education, established to provide technical assistance, training, and resources to public early childhood schools, K-12 schools, and institutions of higher education. ACEF provides resources on facility planning, design, financing, construction, improvement, operation, and maintenance. If it is not your first time to join an ACEF webinar, welcome back. Before we start our session, I want to make mention of a few important details that will enhance your webinar experience. Please make note of the many interface options available on your SABA Centra screen. Participants may reply yes or no in response to the presenter, laugh, applaud, and step out. You may raise your hand for questions, but we would prefer you send your questions through text chat. The text chat button will allow you to send questions to the presenter throughout the presentation. The speaker has an allotted time later in the webinar to address questions that the audience may have. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you take this opportunity to learn from the content presented, engage with the speaker, and add to your professional knowledge of issues related to educational facilities. We are excited to have Alan Lawrence and Mike King joining us today for this webinar entitled School Site Assessment. Alan Lawrence is a registered communications distribution designer and recognized school security and technology expert. His projects include surveillance systems, access control, and intrusion alarm systems. In addition to being an author and frequent lecturer, Mr. Lawrence, in collaboration with ACEF, has provided security assessments for schools across the United States. Mike King is an architect with extensive knowledge and experience with both new construction and renovation projects in public K-12 schools and institutions of higher education. Mr. King, in collaboration with ACEF, has provided technical assistance to public schools across the nation on planning, construction, and sustainability. Welcome, Mr. King and Mr. Lawrence. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience today.
And good morning, everybody. My name is Al Lawrence, and with me today is Mike King, and we'll be hosting today's presentation on considerations for school site assessment. One of the things that we do want to stress to all the folks joining us today is that if you do have any questions, please send them in via text, and we'll respond to them at the end of the presentation. Also, as we go through today's presentation, you will see lists of examples or checklists and recommendations that we show. These are not to be taken as an all-exclusive, end-all, be-all list. For every client that we have out there, everyone has different risks. Everyone has different things that they are looking at. So what we hope that you gather today is just some basic ideas that will help get you started. And then if we need to go into more particular detail at the end of the presentation, just feel free and shoot us a question.
All right, thanks, Al. This is Mike King. We want to talk to you about our goals today for the presentation, and they're twofold. One, we want to increase the awareness of the role site assessments play in helping you develop your emergency operations plan, or your EOP. We'll be referring to the EOP throughout this webinar. And number two, we want to help increase your understanding as to the various types of man-made threats and natural hazards that a school campus can face today. So let's look at our agenda. In order to obtain our goals today, we'll start with an introduction of a current guide that is available for K-12 schools to use for developing school emergency operations plans. We'll discuss the team members who could contribute to the assessment process, and we'll define the differences between a man-made threat and a natural hazard. We'll break down the components of the site assessment and provide ideas to consider while walking through the site and performing the assessment, and we'll also discuss other essential assessments that you may consider using that can impact your overall emergency planning. And then finally, we will discuss some of the various methods you can use today to help prioritize man-made threats and natural hazards that your emergency plans may need to focus on. So let's look at the guide, this introduction to the guide that we have here. It's called the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operation Plans, released by the administration in June of 2013. It was developed by the Education Department in collaboration with the U.S. Departments of Homeland Security, led by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Justice Department, led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and also the Health and Human Services Department. The guide provides planning principles and processes, threat and hazard-specific annexes, and a 6-step process for schools in collaboration with their local community partners to develop or enhance their EOP. This guide also helps schools align emergency planning practices at the national, state, and local levels. Now, the guide provides this 6-step planning process that we talked about to develop a high-quality emergency operations plan for schools to use. This particular guide replaces the practical information on crisis planning, a guide for schools and communities that was released back in 2007. So we'll have a link to this PDF will be made available at the end of this presentation, but you can see the link right up here on the screen. Although the guide for developing high-quality school emergency operation plans provides this overall 6-step process in developing these plans, our focus today in this presentation will cover the first 2 steps where we find the benefits of this assessment to be most helpful. So let's look at the introduction to the guide. The first 2 steps are where the facility assessment process resides. Without this assessment process, schools could find themselves focusing on spending limited funds or resources on events that have a very low likelihood of occurring. For instance, a school built near a rail yard or a military base would plan for different types of man-made threats and natural hazards than a school located in the middle of a residential suburb. Once the assessment is completed and all man-made threats and natural hazards are properly documented and accounted for, then the process of planning your goals and objectives to countering those man-made threats and natural hazards can be established, and the development of the emergency operations plan can begin. The final 6 steps of the process, the final 6 steps in the 6-step process deal with the actual development and process of vetting the EOP from board approval to the process of maintaining and improving your plans for the years to come.
Thank you, Mike. And now that Mike has covered the overall look at the guide and the 6-step process, I want to discuss the actual performing of the site assessment itself. And before you can begin this process, as with any other process that's out there, you need to have the right team. And you need to consider who's going to make up that team, because they're going to be charged with leading this overall assessment. This team's got to be prepared to distinguish the man-made threats and natural hazards faced by the particular campus or the facility. You may not be assessing an elementary campus. You may be assessing your transportation building or your technology building. But you also must understand exactly what the site assessment means to the school and to your community. And, as Mike already pointed out, this is part of a larger 6-step process. All of the things we talk about today will ultimately contribute to the development of your emergency operations plan. So we'll talk a little bit about that team makeup. What you see here is just a list, and again, these lists aren't all exclusive either, but these are some of the folks you need to consider. They may not be part of the complete process from start to finish, but these may be people that you're talking to as you go through the assessments. Your administrators, your receptionists. These are people who are dealing with the day-to-day issues. What are they seeing? What concerns them? Can the receptionist see the approaches to the building? When is the first indication you have a visitor into your campus? What about your janitorial staff? These are the folks who have to clean up, whether it's graffiti or vandalism or just students being students during the day and you have problems in certain areas of your facility. These are the folks you ultimately turn to help fix things. your nurse and counselors. Your nurse is the head of your triage for your particular campus. Does she have all the equipment she needs, or does he have everything that's going to be needed for an emergency? Your teachers, your special needs instructors. Special needs each come with their own priorities, and those will differ from that of the standard classroom. Your campus police or school resource officers, athletics, fine arts directors. The athletics folks and the fine arts directors, they're using your facility at different times. They may be coming in late at night after a football game or after a band competition. So they're there in the evening when a lot of the folks are not. Your technology, transportation, and maintenance directors. These people are key. If you're going to talk about your physical systems that are in your school today, whether that be IP surveillance or access control, the technology directors have to be involved. They have to be coordinated with that. Those systems are going to communicate over their networks. And as more and more of these systems rely on that computer network and its redundancies, we have to make sure that the physical systems are capable of handling the information that's going to be flowing through them. Transportation. Their buses are going to be critical if we ever had to evacuate a facility or reunify students with their parents at an off-site location. And the maintenance directors. As we talked about the janitorial staff being the ones responsible for just cleaning up on the day-to-day, the larger issues, broken windows, spray painting, the types of vandalism like that, that's often taken care of by your maintenance folks. And maintenance is also a key component in crime prevention. Back in the 1980s, a Canadian duo of crime prevention specialists coined the term broken windows. There's a broken windows theory that said if you have a broken window, you need to fix it. And you need to fix it quickly and efficiently. The longer you leave it lay, whether that's the graffiti up on the wall, a busted window, or something else, the worse the message is to the surrounding community. If we constantly see things that are broken or not maintained, then that's not creating a good environment, and it can contribute to additional crime. Your finance director. As we know, our schools today do not have unlimited budgets, so we need to keep costs in mind when we're assessing all the risks and hazards that we may face. But we also can't forget our local emergency responders and our neighbors. The people who live around your schools are there 9 to 5, and they're there from 5 o'clock on. They may be some of the best folks you could turn to for after-hours activities. Can they see the campus? Are they involved? Do they call when they see people trespassing on your property? Do they call the police when you're not there? These folks can play a key component in this process. And then anyone else that you may deem necessary to be part of the team. I think a lot of that's going to depend on your local environment. As Mike pointed out earlier, if you have a campus that's near a military base, then you need to talk to the base commander or their staff and see how they respond to certain situations. If you have a school that is located near a fuel storage or, say, a major international airport, then you need to talk to them about what's in that fuel storage and what do I do if there's a problem there, because I have 3 campuses that are just down the road from that site. Throughout all those memberships, you need to have a team leader. And that team leader is going to be determined by who can provide and perform really 3 key criteria. They need to be the person who can assign the responsibilities and the reporting structures. They need to set the timelines, establish a communication structure with the team, who's talking to who. We may have part of the team is assessing a door, and it may have a maintenance issue. Well, that doesn't necessarily have to go into a report of the assessment. That may be handled by a little wrench turning from our maintenance team. And we also need to coordinate. That leader is going to be responsible for coordinating with the campus principals and other leadership as needed as to when the team is going to be on campus. If you're doing an intruder assessment portion of it where you send somebody in to try to gain access to the facility, you may want to coordinate that with your local authorities. If you're just going to be visiting the campus at day or night, you need to coordinate that not just with the campus staff, but also with the janitorial staff so they can anticipate your arrival. And if you're coming in over a weekend or later in the evening, It's also a good idea to talk to the local authorities, so the patrol officer who's driving around is expecting to see people walking around outside a school building at night. Let's talk about the man-made threats and natural hazards. The first thing I want to point out, again, the lists are not exhaustive or not exclusive. These are just some examples, but man-made threats are just that. These are threats that are a human-caused event, and they're anything that could adversely affect the safety and security of the assets or function of a campus or facility. As I pointed out earlier, you may not be assessing an elementary school. You may be looking at the transportation building that houses your vehicles. That is a different set of assets with a different value that face different types of risks than a school building full of staff and children. And natural hazards are basically any real or potential condition that can cause degradation, injury, illness, loss of equipment, or property damage. Now, when it comes to man-made threats, you also need to keep in mind that those range from a range of sources. They could be adversarial in nature. It could be the custody battle faced by an elementary principal. It could be a threat of gang violence. It could also be incidental. It could be the threat of a suicide attempt or an accidental fire or a vehicle that drove into the property and damaged the side of the building. Those are human-caused events. A campus elementary with a high threat of custody battles needs to assess the ability of the staff to observe people walking toward the facility. How much time do they have to prepare for a parent who may be on a list that says they don't have custody, they do not have visitation? And do they have the systems in place that can help the staff identify those parents who may be barred from entering the campus under court order? And how quickly could they secure the building if they had an incident? Maybe it's not a parent. Maybe it's just a trespasser who's just walked in off the street. And the other thing I want to stress about the natural hazards, this is defined by the operational risk management method used by the FAA. And one of those examples, a fertilizer processing facility located near a school may contain materials that possibly create a situation that could cause threat to not only life but to the facilities themselves. These types of threats and hazards are all around us. So it's important when you're walking around that you're taking not just the facility itself into consideration, but also the surrounding environment. I've provided a list here of some examples of man-made threats, some additional examples. We talked about some of these already. Fire, of course, obviously active shooters, but criminal threats or actions. The majority of the situations you face on a daily basis are not terroristic or an extreme case of violence, but they do involve some criminal intent, or they could involve some criminal intent or an action. Bomb threats, for example. Domestic violence, domestic abuse, cyber attacks, suicide. These, again, are examples of man-made threats that you could face. Some examples of natural hazards: severe weather and lightning, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, fires, ice storms, tsunamis, volcanoes. Obviously, the school located in Kansas is going to be more concerned about the natural hazards posed by a tornado, while a school in, say, Washington or in Alaska that's part of the Ring of Fire is going to be concerned about the possibility for earthquakes, tsunamis, and even volcanoes. So again, it's part of that understanding our surrounding environment. In this particular case with nature, the threat doesn't exactly have to be next door. You could live 20 miles away from a volcano, but it's going to impact you. So are you prepared to evacuate? If you live near the coast and you have the threat of earthquakes, are you prepared to evacuate for a tsunami warning? How quickly can you get the students and staff out of the area? We also want to talk about some examples of biological hazards. Infectious diseases, the flu, tuberculosis, staph infections, meningitis. This is where we talked about having the nurse and having the emergency responder personnel. This is where you need to be consulting with them and getting information either from your staff or through the CDC. But you also need to think about the possibility of contaminated food, salmonella, botulism, E. coli. All of our facilities, or the majority of our school facilities today, have their own kitchens. So how well are they being maintained? And then there may be other toxic materials that are present in school laboratories, cleaning agents used by the janitorial staff. All of that makes up part of the things that you have to consider. And finally, we've got some examples of technological hazards. Technological hazards themselves could be explosions, accidental release of toxins. Again, the fertilizer plant, the industrial or chemical plant that may be nearby. Where is your facility downwind from that type of establishment? The accidental release of hazardous materials from within a school, a gas leak, a laboratory spill involving a chemical agent. Is your facility near a highway or near a major rail line? What is traveling those roads? If you're near a major highway, you may be near a hazardous cargo route. If you're near a railhead, you need to understand what is the principal means of that rail line, what is traveling on those. And then once you understand what is traveling on it, then that will come into your process development as you look at all the risks, and then you start looking at the likelihood of a risk. So how many trains have gone by here during the day? How much truck traffic is on that highway? You also need to consider the possibility of radiological release from nuclear power stations. Some of our schools in the United States are near a nuclear power plant. How much have we talked with the staff at the plant, and how much do we understand what we need to do as part of our evacuation and possibly as part of a decontamination process that may be initiated after a radiological release? Do we live near a dam or other hydro plant type area where we could have a dam failure, whether that be an earthen dam or a concrete dam? We don't all have a Hoover Dam in our backyard, but if you live near a major river tributary, earthen dams, and if you have a lot of rain that have weakened them, you need to just keep in mind that could be a potential risk. And then, of course, there's always power failure. Power failure not only would impact us from an operational standpoint, it could also lead to costly damage to our technology systems, our network electronics, our switchgear, our phone systems, and other things that rely on a continuous flow of power.
Thanks, Al. Now we're going to look at the site assessment process and planning. Exactly what is the site assessment? It's going to provide you an increased understanding of the potential impact of man-made threats and natural hazards that Al has just talked about on the school buildings or on school grounds. The assessment includes, and it's not limited to this, but a review of the building access and egress control measures, visibility around the exterior of the building, what kind of bushes and trees are providing places where people can hide and that sort of thing. You also look at the structural integrity of the building. I'm going to make a little side note here that that always needs to be performed by a licensed structural engineer. We'll also look at compliance with applicable architectural standards for individuals with disabilities. We're looking at the ADA, or the American with Disabilities Act, and with other functional and access needs, emergency vehicle access, for instance. So the purpose in performing the assessment is to educate the team so they better understand the risks and the vulnerabilities that are facing the staff, the students, the school buildings, and the grounds. This is critical in development of an effective and well-developed EOP. This is a learning process. Realize that this is ongoing. This needs to be repeated on an annual basis in order for this to be the most effective for you.
And the site assessment itself has three components that we're going to touch on that I do want to bring your attention to. There is the safety aspect of this. Some of the examples that you would look at during a safety component may be the status of the playground equipment, the depth, the condition of the materials used around the playground equipment, but also interior safety assessments. How are the chemicals in the science laboratory being stored? Are there any tripping hazards? Do we have the bane of our fire marshal of too many electrical cords plugged in one after another? Do we have staff that are propping the doors to the classrooms open? And what is the policy of the school, in regards to that? That's why it's important to have those administrators and have that leadership. They understand that process. You may have a substitute teacher in that day who doesn't understand that our policy is to keep doors locked and to keep them closed. The other thing you need to take in consideration if you're propping a door is the door rated for a 20-minute fire? If it's rated and you're propping the door, your fire marshal is going to have a few things to talk to you about.
Yeah, they don't like that. Accessibility, we talked a little bit about that just a minute ago, considers compliance with the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA. This was introduced back in 1991, so everybody should have a plan in place about how to eliminate the barriers to their schools. But the things you need to look for are wheelchair accessible ramps. Are they in place? Are they the correct slope? Are the handrails set at the proper height? Can a wheelchair-bound individual enter a restroom, be able to turn around into the space? One of the major components is parking and how you enter the building, where those are located, curb ramp access, and the slope into the main building, or can they all be accessible? So the main thing to realize here is you need to have a certified licensed professional perform this portion of the assessment for you, such as an architect or somebody that's in the field of providing ADA assessments.
And the last part of this is the emergency preparedness. We deal a lot with schools in designing and planning of surveillance and access control, and those are all mechanical systems. All the mechanical systems in the world, though, are not going to help you, and they can't compete when you compare that to the benefits of a well-trained and a prepared staff. It's the human element that's going to make the difference in any emergency situation you face. How well trained is the staff? Do we have 10 out of 100 of our teachers certified in CPR and the AED, or do we have 90% of our teachers and staff certified in CPR and AED? Do we know who those people are? Do we know where the AED device is actually located at? Do they know what to do when someone drops off a suspicious package? Do we have times when we allow deliveries? When we talk about situational awareness, if our staff understands that there is a specific time frame for deliveries and drop-offs, and suddenly a package truck shows up and parks itself next to one of our schools or to one of our facilities, does our staff feel empowered to act, to ask questions, to draw the attention to the campus leadership to ask, why is that truck parked up next to our windows that house our computer lab? Do they engage the visitors or strangers who may visit the campus? I have seen through my own personal experience that even at the elementary and primary school, that simply walking in with a sense of purpose, making eye contact with the staff, even though you're carrying a backpack on your shoulder, still leads you into the building unchallenged, only eventually to find a staff member who may talk to you, but then you're assessing whether or not they know what to do next. Do they escort you to the office? Do they call the office to have you escorted to where you need to be? Or, as the case of one example, do they turn you over to a fifth grade student who's part of the safety team and have them escort you down to the office? These are all things that we're asking our teachers and we're asking our receptionists and our administrators and our paraprofessionals to deal with. And unfortunately, that's kind of the case of the world we have today. But the key component is, does that staff feel empowered by the administration to make the difference, to make those decisions? It may be the English teacher calling in a lockdown, not the principal, because the English teacher saw the event that triggered in their mind, that is a situation and I must act. I want to talk about the building review. And we're going to talk about access and egress control measures, exterior and interior visibility, and we're also going to touch briefly on structural integrity. But during the building review, the team should be assessing the means and methods that can be used to gain access to the facility. Through a discipline that we call crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED, we have a core principle that talks about natural access control. How do we control the flow of visitors who enter our building so they cannot simply walk directly onto our campus from any direction because we lack the proper perimeter fencing? That they can park their vehicles and walk up to our office where we can't see them because our office doesn't have good natural surveillance over the approaches to the building, or the office windows are blocked by vegetation and other obstructions. They could be posters hanging on the window. What we also want to ask ourselves is, are we putting the safety of our staff and our students in the hands of what is basically luck, and hope that every visitor who comes into the building, everybody who comes in at any time of the given day, is going to have that 10 seconds of honesty that it would normally take from them to go from the front door to the main office. How well can we see them? How well are we prepared to receive our visitors? What about the conditions of the exterior doors and the classroom doors themselves? Do the exterior doors shut and lock and function properly? Do they stick when it starts to heat up during the summertime and the late spring? We may have all of our exterior doors locked, but if they're not closing properly, then one of the basic key components of our physical security is left weakened. Can the teachers lock their classroom doors from the inside, or do they keep them in a ready state of lock? We see a lot of differences in opinions amongst campus leadership, even between superintendents and their principals, about, well, we don't want to lock the classroom doors and keep them closed because we have to deal with the classroom interruptions. We don't want kids going back and forth. Or sometimes we don't have enough keys to hand out because we have substitutes that day and they can't secure their facility or secure the classroom. Sometimes with the doors, it may be a simple case of too much positive air pressure from inside the facility or inside that vestibule that just the closer is not strong enough to push past all that. So when you're walking those campuses, be checking those little things. Sometimes it is the little details. When you're looking at the exterior doors, do you see the rocks, the bricks, the buckets, the football equipment or the weights that may be around the athletic area? Those are all door stops, and they're there for a reason because they've been used before and they will continue to be used again. But we also have the key component, and Michael touched briefly on that, about the structural integrity. But the other thing I want to point out about those offices is when you're walking in your office, does the staff have the windows drawn shut? Are the blinds closed? Is the sunlight coming in the morning so the staff keeps them closed that way, but do they open them up later? There may be some very simple things you can do that automatically improve the natural surveillance of the staff just by opening a blind or taking down some posters from the windows.
We want to talk a little bit about the structural integrity here in the building review and what that really involves. And a lot of the things that Al has been talking about here can be done locally with the people on your team and just the observations that he's discussed as he's gone through some of these items. But as you get into the building components themselves, I think you really need the team of having an architect and a structural engineer there to look at the other parts of these components that deal with building code compliance. Have we enclosed now a corridor that was meant to serve as an exit that has now been closed up, or created a dead-end corridor that is now a fire hazard, in trying to exit the building? So you need that expertise on your team, and I think that was something that we we should have put on the list there of having when you're doing a full building assessment. Structurally, you can go around the building and look and see and observe cracks that are in the building, or if a wall appears to be leaning out or something like that. You know, that is your clue to hire or to get a professional out there on that and have that checked out. Certainly, if you're seeing cracks or anything like that on the interior of a building, you need to know if that is a load-bearing wall, if there's some hazard that might be involved there that needs to be looked at, and certainly an architect or an engineer can do that for you.
And when you're visiting the campuses, not only visit the campuses during the day, but also you need to be out there in the evening. When you're out there in the day, arrive before drop-off or arrive before the pickup periods when the parents are coming in. Observe the paths that are being taken by the students. Some of your students walk to school. What is along that path? Are there abandoned properties? Are there vacant lots? Are there areas with high traffic coming in and out? Perhaps your students are walking past a donut shop, which is very popular in the morning, not just with pedestrians, but with drivers who may not always be looking out for the kids. Where are the parents picking up their children? Not every parent is standing in line or sitting in their car in line. Some of them park across the street. They'll park in the church parking lot that's on the other side of the road. And are we making provisions as a school to get the students safely across that road so they can be reunited with mom and dad? And when you visit the campus at night, that's going to allow you to understand the quality of your lighting. Where are the shadow areas around your building? Dark things happen in dark places. And if you're trying to cut down on vandalism or trespassing, or you're finding signs that people have been on your playgrounds on the weekend, whatever the reason, if you're not illuminating the area, if you plan on addressing it by adding surveillance, but you don't address the light, then you're putting the camera in the dark, and it's not going to be as beneficial to you as you had hoped. But also when you're out there at night, take a look at your gates. Do we have personnel gates or vehicle gates that are supposed to be locked at night? Are they? Are the doors and windows properly closed? Are those blinds that we stress during the day to be open actually closed now at night? And don't forget to look around the surrounding neighborhood. Can the neighbors see your facility? Do you see the neighbors being outside in the evening? Walk on over, introduce yourself, ask them if they've seen things. There's no shortage of the avenues that you can collect intelligence about these types of things. Make sure you're properly equipped with floor plans and site plans, and be careful on the aerial images, whether that's Google Earth or Bing Maps. Sometimes these different sites will provide you with a map that may be not current. You may have added additional facilities or expanded parts of your facility that aren't shown there. You also want to be taking a look as you walk the perimeter of the facility to look for the gaps in the fence line. Do we have a community playground that we're allowing the public to enter? Do we have the ability to secure that during the school hours? Do we have our signs posted indicating the time that it's acceptable to be on the campus? What areas of the property are unobservable by the staff even during recess? Do we have good natural surveillance over the playground area? Or are there hiding places such as adjacent wood lines or drainage areas or depressions or natural elements that may inhibit our vision and our ability to see around the students? And a camera. Take pictures, take video, capture the specific examples that you're going to put in your report, because this is going to lend credence to explaining why it is we're setting our emergency operations plans the way we are. There's also additional assessments that I just want to touch on briefly about that you can be taking a look at. The culture and climate assessment. This helps school observe the local environment of the school. Is it a friendly and welcoming space? What do the students think about their school? How safe does the staff and student body really feel? Are there any underlying issues that the staff may not be aware of? Providing questionnaires to students can reveal a great deal about the climate of the facility. And remember, whenever providing assessments to the students, they must have the confidence in knowing that they are responding anonymously. The importance of the data can help lead to corrective measures, whether that's an increase in anti-bullying or the development of Crime Stoppers, or perhaps just something as simple as snuffing out the rumor mill. But follow-up is going to be important in this process. You need to do that to ensure the implemented programs or solutions are being put forth by the campus, because if we've taken this information but we don't act upon it, then our staff and our students are going to lose faith. There's the school threat assessment. This examines the behavioral issues and other indicators that a staff or student body member may become or a threat to the safety and security of the campus. They must be based on fact, not some form of bias, and the teams performing that level of assessment should come from a multidisciplinary background and must comply with all known labor laws and applicable requirements. But the focus of this particular team is to identify those that are at risk, to help them and to help get them the help that they need to mitigate or eliminate the threat that could be in the process of developing. And then capacity assessments. These are not your assessments that look at the number of kids and do we have the proper number of classrooms and the proper number of science labs. These are a capacity assessment from the idea of emergency planning. They help you identify those assets or resources that may be needed during an actual emergency. We talked about the number of staff members who are CPR and AED certified. How many radios or flashlights do we have on campus? Where are they kept? Is there anyone who has special skills, first aid training, that may be needed in case of an emergency? How many of our staff members are bilingual? What languages do they speak? What staff members have the skill sets needed to work with special needs students? So identifying these personnel or assets now, or implementing a training program to help develop them, I feel is important so everyone on the team understands what his or her responsibilities might be if an emergency occurs. So we've talked about all the types of natural hazards and man-made threats that we can see, but we need to be able to prioritize them. We talk about the risk and vulnerability assessments and this information. This is all part of that six-step process again that goes into developing the emergency operations plan. But this is a process that gathers all that information, all that list that we provided before, and then some. And it helps you put all that information into a format that allows you to assess and compare each item. It helps you determine the likelihood and the likely consequences should any of the natural hazard or man-made threats actually come to life. Typically, this information can be displayed in a table, an Excel spreadsheet, for example, with columns that help organize the material. The columns should allow the owner to assign numerical values based on some following criteria. What is the actual man-made threat or hazard? What is the likelihood or frequency of occurrence of that threat or hazard actually happening? What will happen if the man-made threat or natural hazard actually does happen? Are we going to lose a facility for a day, a week, a year? And the last question, what will happen? What are the consequences if that actually comes to light? That can have a variety of answers, and you need to break that down even further into the length of time. So how much time would be needed to get staff and students to a safe location? How much time would we lose the facility? What is our backup plan to sending our students to another campus if we needed to? And additional factors could include the overall impact of the campus or the mission of the district. The costs could be measured in, unfortunately, lives lost, property rendered useless, tangible assets destroyed. Perhaps the event occurred at our transportation facility and we lost half of our fleet of buses. The additional impact could have basic interruptions in service or the ability to support the educational mission of the school. Once the table has been created and once you have those columns set up, and I will show an example of that in a moment, you must assign a numerical value to each of these categories that will help you determine the priorities that you need to focus on. Assigning a numerical value, this is not an exact science. There's not a thing that says you have to do this. The values can range from 0 and 5 to 1 through 10. But those are normally used in the process and can be broken out in this type of format. Probability, if it's highly likely it's going to occur, or likely, possible to unlikely. Rate them out in a numerical line. The impact or the magnitude, is it catastrophic, is it critical, or is it negligible? And then assign the numerical values to the warning time. How much time do we have to prepare for this type of event? Is it minimal? Could it happen on us instantaneously? An earthquake, for example. Or do we have time to prepare? The longer we have more time to prepare, the lower the number. So as you see, some of these things, the higher the number, the greater the threat. But other times it could be the higher the number, it's not as great an impact to you. And then the duration. How long will the impact resonate? If it's going to be longer than 12 plus hours, rate it as a 4. If it's going to be less, then you see how we scale it down. And all of this is, is subject to how you want to set up your own rating category. And then you're going to finally take all that information and you're going to assign the overall priority. By assigning the priorities, that's going to help you be able to focus on investing your money into the things that you deem are necessary. And here's an example of the vulnerability assessment spreadsheet. You see on the left we have the hazard, a tornado or hurricane, the probability, the magnitude, the warning time. And again, there's the example of where the higher the number, the shorter the time you have to prepare. With forecasting today, you have a little bit longer time to prepare for a hurricane than you would a tornado. The duration of the event, hurricanes can last for days. Tornado, a very brief, violent moment. And then the overall total score, and where does that total score place that particular hazard or threat? So just a final review, we've talked about a lot of information. I just want to kind of enclose it all. We introduced the guide for developing the high-quality school emergency operation plan. We understand the assessment process, where it fits in that 6-step process used to develop an emergency operation plan. We discussed who should be included in the assessment team. We've provided examples of man-made threats and natural hazards that could be considered when assessing a campus or facility. We reviewed the components of the assessment process and discussed some tips and items to help bring during the assessment. And we've also provided you with some information on helping you prioritize the threats and natural hazards. And as we stressed before, this is part of that 6-step process. Once we've completed the assessment, the next steps are helping us determine our goals and objectives, the development of the actual emergency operation plan, its preparation, review, and approval, and the implementation and the maintenance of that plan as you go forward. And finally, we wanted to provide you with a list of resources. The Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools, the Technical Assistance Center, REMS has provided the guide that we talked about today, and the link for that is shown on this slide. And that concludes our presentation. I just wanted to address a couple of questions that did come in. One of our attendees asked if copies of the slides will be made available to attendees. I believe yes, and the folks with the American Clearinghouse will help set that up and coordinate that. We had a question, how do you know if someone is qualified and credible to do a site assessment? You know, that's an excellent question, because school violence and the issues that have come up gather a lot of attention in the media. And there are people out there who will spring up and say, I can assess it, I can walk around and follow a checklist. You need to take a look at their experience. Shop around. check their references. Have they done work at other schools? Do they have any K-12 experience at all? Or are they coming from a security background? They may be a security trained or certified individual, but is it in corporate security or chemical plant security? Or do they understand K-12 from the standpoint of not just the buildings and that, but also the operational impact? They need to be understanding of how a school works. So my best advice there is simply to shop around, do your homework before you go making any sort of investment with a company or a firm who may be out there today.
There could be also a list of providers from your school state assessment department, or not, there's not a department like that, but I mean, for instance, the Texas Education Agency may have a list of providers possibly that have that.
And you need to check with your state as well, and Mike brings up a good point. In Texas, there is a Texas School Safety Center. We have the American Clearinghouse of Educational Facilities. But in some places, they may keep lists of people who are qualified to provide you with those assessments. Another question that came in, what types of costs might be involved in hiring a structural engineer? Typically, and I'll have Mike touch base on this a little bit more, but aside from doing the homework and looking at their background and their skill sets, I think a lot of that is going to be settled out in negotiations. But you need to talk with your purchasing department as well to make sure there's not any sort of state requirement when hiring a professional who's providing a professional service.
That's right, Al. Excuse me, sorry. I just have to refer back to Texas again, sorry, but we do have a Professional Procurement Act in the state of Texas that requires if you're hiring a professional, you hire them based on their qualifications, not on their fee. Once you've established that they're qualified to do the service that you want to have them done, then you negotiate the fee for them. And, you know, it's simply going to depend on the amount of time that they're going to have to spend coming out to look at either one particular facility. You might have just one incident like we talked about, maybe some cracks in the walls that you want them to look at. Or are they evaluating all the schools on your campus? And, you know, you're going to want to look at all of the structural components of every facility. So the fee will vary. Again, look at their qualifications first.
And be as detailed in the description of the scope of services you are expecting as possible.
Exactly.
If you just tell a structural engineer, yeah, we need an assessment, that could open a variety of possible paths for you to take. So make sure you understand what it is exactly you expect from a professional like that. One of the questions that came in, once a site assessment has been conducted, what guidance would you give regarding publicly acknowledging your defined vulnerabilities? The school board is obviously going to be involved in this process through the approval of the emergency operations planning, but you're also not required when it comes to conditions of safety and security. And again, as Mike pointed out, we'll have to speak from a Texas standpoint. School boards are not required to disclose the vulnerabilities that come from a safety and security assessment. Those should be discussed in executive council. And you know, talking about the solutions and the things that you're going to provide versus, okay, we know that we have a high vulnerability to attack because we don't have any fencing. We're establishing perimeter fencing because we have an open campus and we want to increase the security and safety of the students. So, yeah, you do not have to provide a list that I'm aware of. You do not have to provide out a specific list to say, hey, here's what we found with all of our schools. You know, those things I believe should be kept in close confidentiality with the administration.
Everyone we've presented to has been in a closed session of the school board meeting so that you can talk freely about the threats that are out there and the measures that you're going to take to handle those.
And that's all of our questions. If you have any other questions, please email the folks at ACEF, and they will be happy to send them over to us. We do appreciate everyone's time today, and we hope that this has been a beneficial presentation for you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
ACEF would like to extend a very special thank you to our presenters, Mr. Mike King and Mr. Alan Lawrence, and our participants for joining our webinar today. We hope that you took this opportunity to learn from the content presented, engaged with the speaker, and will use this content to advance your professional knowledge on issues related to school site assessment. Please take a moment to complete the webinar evaluation. We value your opinion and look forward to hearing your feedback. Remember to visit our website at acefacilities.org and follow us on your preferred social media outlet.